All right, so let's officially kick things off, everybody. So welcome to the AM session of day two of RMUS fourth annual Tech Week. Thank you very much for joining us here this morning. We've got an exciting day and an exciting rest of the week planned. So today we're going to start off with our DFR panel. This afternoon we will have Fraser Holland, our director of technology, will be joined by Kurt Larry of Hextronics and Santiago Echeverria of Votics for some live doc demos. So you're going to actually see a bunch of stuff flying around. You can see what we got behind me there. Shout out to AVSS for the parachute. Thanks, Josh. And then tomorrow we'll be doing some longer range stuff. In the morning we'll have Wade Hawkins on with Laurent, our head of Western Canada. He'll be talking about longer range BVLOS and heavy lift cargo operations, which we're really looking forward to getting more into this year. Afternoon, we're going to be talking about a fixed wing challenge. So we've got a whole bunch of stuff on the fixed wing platforms, VTOLs for LiDAR, etc. So we'll have the legendary Ted Stresmiri from SkyPixel who will be on here, and it'll be exciting to see Ted. And then Thursday is Throwdown Thursday. I know Andy was in the original Throwdown, actually. I forgot about that, Andy, but Throwdown Thursday. So we'll start out in the morning. We'll compare sort of the non-blue SUAS. So it's going to be Skydio, DJI, Parrot, Autel, head-to-head, mano a mano, no punches pulled, no marketing BS. It'll just be a real deal. So make sure you check that. And then in the afternoon, we're gonna revisit the blue SUAS 1.0 Throwdown, the little stuff. So Skydio, Vantage, Teal, and Parrot will go head to head. We've got some of the new platforms in there for those things. So that'll be fun. And then Friday will be Innovation Day Friday, where we're going to interview three top-notch producers or partners that we have. Suncor, Hydro-Quebec, and Ontario Power Generation will do some in-depth interviews on their program. So for today we're going to talk about DFR, drone as a first responder. And this is a really interesting one. For those of you that joined us last year, and Ariel put the link in the chat, we were lucky to have really one of probably the pioneer, Chula Vista, Captain Miriam Fox from Chula Vista was kind enough to join us. And they were kind of the first ones to do it. It was a great interview. I highly recommend that you check it out. And that was kind of the baseline for what we're gonna talk a little bit more about today, which is what's the next level up from that. So this is really a continuation, and we have a north and southern crew of experts that are pioneers and leaders in their fields in both the U.S. and Canada that we're really excited. So first of all, I would like to introduce Andy Olson. Andy is actually a Viking. That's not known by a lot of people, but he is legitimately descended by those guys you see on television there. And Andy is a longtime officer with a some would say sordid, but I would say intriguing history in all kinds of stuff that is fantastic and wonderful, and really one of the pioneers of drone deployment in Canada, and most recently, I guess one of the co-founders and executive director of SARA, Canadian Emergency Responders Robotics Association, which is, probably, I think, the premium organization of its type, certainly in Canada and probably globally as well. And so we've got Andy up here to represent Canada. And then we want to thank, it's the first time he'll be joining RMUS, Brandon Carr, formerly of Pearland and currently in Pearland, and currently with DroneSense, another awesome technology platform. But Brandon himself is a pioneer, and we'll talk a lot about that today in terms of actually executing these DFR programs. So gentlemen, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for the great intro.
Let's kick. Yeah, no problem. So let's kick it up. So I wanna kind of, we'll do the north-south thing. So I want to start it out. So Andy, what is DFR? What is this? What does it actually mean? We're hearing a lot of things, there's boxes and all kinds of stuff. What does DFR actually mean?
Yeah, so it's it's a pretty involved topic. I think most people are familiar with it as drone as a first responder, and it's the ability to use robotics to go and investigate a scene ahead of time. I think most people are obviously commonly associated with the drones. From our Sarah point of view, it also includes the ground and the water robots too, because there's a lot of situations where you have the aerial drones working in conjunction with underwater robots, or you have air and ground robots working in conjunction. Just obviously, there's some things that an aerial system can do that a ground robot can't, and vice versa. So I guess from our point of view, we're looking at it as sort of a combination effect of basically using technology and robots in place of the humans.
Fantastic. So, Brandon, do you have anything you would add to what Andy had to say there?
Yeah, I mean, he knocked it out of the park. It's a force multiplier for public safety to be able to not only handle calls for service, but to disregard people from calls for service, which really helps with personnel shortages and resource allocation and tactics. I think it's going to be the future of public safety responses compared to the traditional way that we currently are doing it with people on the ground for every call. So I think you nailed it, Andy.
Fantastic. Good start. So Brandon, I'm going to stick with you. Again, new to the RMUS Canada audience for probably most of them. So give us a real brief history of Pearland and then maybe take us through the evolution and how you sort of took what Chula's doing and took it to the next level.
Absolutely. So Pearland Police Department's drone program started in 2017. Unfortunately, our program was born out of tragedy. We had an autistic juvenile that went missing Thanksgiving of 2017. It was a massive search. Like I wish Andy was down there at that time because he would have been a massive help. But we had volunteer search and rescue teams out there. We had Coast Guard out there. We had all of the neighboring agencies out there looking for the child. And unfortunately, he made his way to a pond on the property as they do as being autistic. And died. And at the time, there was a lieutenant actually who wrote up a proposal for utilizing drones for search and rescue. And back then, I was just a lowly patrolman doing my thing, making sure people weren't breaking into cars and businesses and doing bad things. But I come from an aviation background. Before I became a cop, I was a flight instructor for single engine, multi-engine, and fixed wing aircraft. And I was sitting in a parking lot trying to make sure the place didn't get robbed and found the proposal. And I was like, hey, this guy's speaking my language. So I asked Chief if I could run with it. And he said, absolutely, see what you can do. And I reached out to some subject matter experts that I found on Facebook, and they fortunately took me under their wing, and we off to the races with the drone program. From there, we were just incredibly fortunate to be positioned in the right place at the right time for multiple different opportunities. And we grew our drone program into every aspect of law enforcement. So now we fly for undercover operations, we fly for SWAT operations, normal patrol operations, and of course, drone as first responder and crash crime scene reconstruction. But during the pandemic with COVID, we had a lot of downtime. Calls for services went down just because people weren't out and about anymore. And so I was doing research on drone as first responder, and I came across Chula Vista. And so I loved what they did. I thought that was an outstanding use of the technology. But the problem is, with me being in the South Houston, Texas region, if I were to put people on rooftops, they would die in the summer. Last year during the summer, we had an entire month of triple-digit Fahrenheit temperatures. So like they would literally die of heat exhaustion out there. And so I said, well, I can't do it the way Chula Vista does. So let's go for the Holy Grail. Why not, right? Let's get fully beyond visual line of sight and operations over people. How hard could it be? Little did I know it was difficult. But luckily, I'd have some really good contacts in the FAA, and I reached out to them and said, in a perfect world, what would you want to see, right? Let's see if we can get to a yes. So they told me what I needed. I had to have something that can be as good or better than a human visual observer. I had to have something that could find transponding aircraft and non-transponding aircraft. I had to have something to make sure that the airspace was safe to operate in. So that's where I started my long and tenuous road with the FAA. A year and 2 months later, we were able to have a lot of discussions about what that looked like and what the legality of it all was. And I was able to get my authorization for fully beyond visual line of sight and operations over people for public safety responses.
So good. So let's just put a hold there. I think maybe just for context for some of the people that don't know, Andy, I know you've been down in Chula Vista as I have a couple of times. So maybe just talk a little bit about the Chula Vista program from a baseline perspective, and then we'll kind of go back to Brandon and talk about how he kind of innovated and improved on based on what he was able to do. So let me throw that over to you.
So sorry to cover the Chula Vista program. Okay.
Yeah, just kind of talk a little bit about what they do there. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, Chula Vista's been great for number one for kind of blazing the trail. Number two, just kind of setting an early template. So they operate, I think it's 4 stations. Correct me if I'm wrong, Brandon, from their rooftop. So they have basically a rooftop drone, usually like a DJI M300 type platform, and then there'll be an operator / visual observer, and then in the office of their headquarters, there'll be like the main pilot. So as Brandon said, I mean, that's very innovative. They've been good because they've kind of learned their lessons and they're completely willing to share those. So some things like posting information about the flights so the public can see it, to kind of take it out of that sort of a secret clandestine stuff. Just being open and transparent lets them do a lot of things. But as Brandon mentioned, like sometimes it's very labor intensive having a human observer on the rooftop. So some of the things we're looking at now is, like Brandon mentioned, with some of the technology available to monitor airspace, because a human being can only do so much. But that's one of the big benefits of what we're doing now and programs like this, is to be able to share lessons learned. So like me being in Ontario, somebody in British Columbia, somebody being in New York or Germany, we're able to connect and share all these informations, and it advances everybody's program that much faster. So complete hats off to Chula Vista for blazing the way and sharing the information.
Yeah, and they've been great, as you mentioned, and if you have a department, they're usually, I think they run fairly regular kind of drop-ins if you want to have a look as well, and especially if you're going to AVSI this year, it's in San Diego, so they are hosting a couple of events, I believe, on the Thursday and Friday. Reach out to me if you're interested in going. And just a secondary thing, we do have a chat, so if you have specific questions for any of us, just pop the question in the chat, and we'll make sure we get it answered during the session or at the Q&A at the end. So back to you, Brandon. So now we've got this as a baseline. So talk about the DFR part of your program and how you were operating. You know, did you have a central command? Did you use drone in the boxes? Did you evolve? Like what did it look like at the beginning, and then how did that evolve from an equipment perspective?
Yeah, in the beginning, we started with just proof of concept, right? So I would go to where our first launch site would be, and I just flew a Part 107 for here in the United States, and just tried to see, you know, what would the response time look like? You know, can I coordinate ground control? How ground personnel? What's the time on scene look like? Things of that nature. And that went exceptionally well because we integrated in our traffic cameras, we integrated in our automatic license plate readers to find stolen vehicles, and things of that nature. So it really helped with the call for service volume. Next, I went and got with our crime analyst and said, what does it look like across my entire city? Like, where would the drone be going? Where would be the best use of our investment into the drone as first responder program? And so once I had the map, then I said, okay, well, this is where I want to have those launch sites, right? So the first one is right next to an outdoor mall where we have a lot of theft, a big outdoor shopping area. And that's where we placed our first one. And within the first month, we were able to support multiple stolen vehicle hits on our ALPRs. We were able to respond to multiple calls for service in the mall. So we had an immediate list of wins that we were able to show chief. From there, I built out a phased approach for the entire city. So what we're looking at is a total of 6 launch sites across all 50 square miles of my city. And we would have all of those launch sites piloted from a central location at our police department. So right now we have 3 DJI docks in theater. We have one that we're waiting to put on top of the police department. And we have the detect and avoid solutions across my city's footprint for where we have those launch sites to make sure that where we're flying is safe to do so. So yeah, we got 6 launch sites across, like I said, all 50 square miles, all piloted from inside of our hangar, inside of our police department in the center of the city.
And how many pilots do you have operating so far?
So currently, strictly for the DFR program, we have 5 pilots. That's 2 supervisors and 3 pilots. All of them are pilots. For the entire drone program, we have 8 pilots, and we're working on getting the remainder of them as DFR pilots as well.
Fantastic. Okay.
So, like for example, with this last month, I pulled up some of the statistics, but just in the month of March, with 7 partial days of piloting, they had 17 live operations. They had a 3-minute average response time, 1.5 minutes being the fastest response time, 2 arrests directly related to the support of the drone operation, and 11 times that drone was first on scene. And 2 of those calls were immediately cleared with the drone by itself, where they didn't have to put first responders on scene, which is outstanding.
Incredible. And I think I think there was similar statistics, obviously, at Chula Vista as well. So that's consistent with what we've seen in other places. So pretty exciting numbers for for the white shirt command level as well. I think for sure. I would like to touch on you. I think it was great, that kind of phased in approach. And Andy, I'll pass it on to you. But I know certainly up here in Canada, we've had dialogue with Transport Canada. There's panels going on right now, and I think that a lot of that is that's the thing to take out. If you don't need to get like full BV loss right off the bat. You don't need it for proof of concept or even pilot work. You can do a lot of this stuff even with a dock, with a visual observer. And the way the systems are set up now, you can have a second controller, and you'll be able to, address any Transport Canada regulations, even if you're piloting it remotely from the dock. And so you can see behind me here, we even have the parachutes now available for the new DJI Dock 2, the M3D and M3DT. Sorry. So you can do flight over people and all that. So there's a lot in place that will help you to get this going. And I think as Brandon said, that's exactly what you want to do. Get some quick wins. It becomes pretty obvious, the value proposition fast, and then you expand. And the good news is TC is pretty good. So with that one, I'm going to segue to you, Andy. So talk to me about kind of where DFR is in Canada, some of the projects that you're working on, and where you kind of see it going.
Yeah, thanks. So there are agencies here that are doing DFR. I'm just not really at liberty to say right now. But I think a big part of it is it's not just Canada. Like, we are leveraging information from agencies like Brandon, Chula Vista, but also our partners like Australia, Norway. It really is it's a universal issue. Everybody has sort of the same challenges. I think a lot of departments, sometimes people with a little bit of information think they're just going to jump in and it's going to be a solution without realizing all the complexities. There's like, where are you going to position these systems? What system are you going to use? Understanding airspace, all the administrative details like budgets and operator training, things like that. I know Brandon, they were one of the leaders. We already talked about sort of the limitation of the human visual observer. Just humans are humans, and it's really hard to maintain a constant watch on the sky, especially in a 360-degree format. So there's a lot of technologies now, like optical sensors, radar-based sensors. It's important to understand how that is going to improve safety and also lessen the operator workload. But there's things to understand. Optical systems are great, but they might not work, probably don't work at night. Radar systems work all the time, but they can't be mobile. They have to be in a fixed, there's a lot of logistics into putting radar in, and then how are you going to manage that information? Managing information is the big one. Obviously, we're partnered with DroneSense. It's a phenomenal system to aggregate all the information. As Brandon mentioned, you don't just have the feed from a drone coming in. You have airspace awareness monitoring. You have potential feeds from body cameras, from cell phone cameras, traffic cameras. There's a ton of information coming in, and you can have the best information in the world, but if you don't understand how to manage it, how to aggregate, how to use it, it's going to be useless. So some of the projects we're working on, we have some trials already set up with some agencies here just to understand some of the logistics. But as I mentioned, it's also to focus on operator training. Like now you're not outside with a controller, you're potentially in an office. So you're even further removed from the environment. So understanding things like weather and all the other little things that are natural when you're outside, it's how we're going to understand that. And then we get into, I don't know if we want to copy now. We're looking at some of the heavier lift cargo systems going longer range, bigger payloads. That's a whole different category from some of the smaller drones. So it's really one of those things. It's advancing in an unbelievable rate, and we find the regulations, the legislation, no matter where you're on the world, are always sort of the choke point, because a regulation that was written even just a few years ago is probably not going to be immediately adaptable to some of the technology. So we have a really good relationship with Transport Canada, and in a lot of cases, we're able to interpret how the technology is going to come into play with the regulation, so we can still move ahead with permission as long as both sides understand what's involved. That's one of the big things we're working on right now, is just being able to match legislation that was written a few years ago with technology that's literally changing while we're sitting here out doing this webinar.
Yeah, and the good news is, I think our experience has been, Transport Canada with the new regulations coming out, they're very pro this type of technology, and they're very interested in working with partners to prove out the concepts. And as Andy said, there's virtually opportunities in every province right now across Canada, and that's ongoing. So that'll only continue to develop. So maybe let's talk a little bit about that on your side, Brandon, on the regulatory side. So at what point did you get in? I think you were the first certainly DFR application that I heard that was actually using the IRIS system. So maybe talk about how you found IRIS, how you found the system, and how that sort of assuaged any concerns that the FAA would have.
Absolutely. So I went with the IRIS system for two reasons, to be honest with you, at the time. One of them was cost, and the other one was familiarity. So I knew that the Census Centero system was running IRIS automation Cassia X cameras on the fixed wing system, and they've been getting beyond visual line of sight authorizations under Part 107 for corridor inspection, right? So I knew the FAA knew the system. I knew that they're comfortable with detect and avoid utilizing that system. And so I wanted to leverage that familiarity with the FAA. Right, I didn't want to try to come at them with something brand new that I had to vet and and go down that whole rabbit hole. I wanted something they knew. So that was one. Number two, the reason that I went with IRIS was cost. So back in 2020, when I was starting to look at all this and starting making the networking and talking about it, if I didn't have $250,000, I wasn't getting radar, right? At least. And if I had brought a $250,000 price tag for only radar, not everything else, to my command, I would have got laughed out of the office. So I went with something that was small, something that was affordable, and something that the FAA knew. And I knew that IRIS Automation's Cassia system is really nice. It works really great during the daytime, but it's only daytime, right? I knew there were limitations there. So again, crawl, walk, run. I know that I will eventually need to get radar as well for my night operations. But again, going and talking to your crime your crime analysts, our peak operating times is 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Our operational times currently are 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. I'm only losing 3 hours of operational time. We're still getting a vast majority of our operational footprint by running day operations. So for my agency, that wasn't a massive deal that we weren't getting night operations. Now we are going to move there. Radar is getting cheaper. We will supplement our safety system with radar. But there are some great benefits that come from that electrical optical, like, for example, validation of the ping, right? With radar, it's just a dot on a map. Whether it's 2D or 3D, I can't validate what it is. So how do I know if that's a bird? How do I know if that is an ultralight? How do I know if that's a hang glider? it's really difficult to get that information. So utilizing a visual sensor like that helps validate. It helps the human at the teleoperator side go with it, or know if they need to deconflict that or not. So that's the reason why I went with Iris Automation back in 2020, right? Because again, it was familiar to the FAA and it was very affordable for what we were looking to build out. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. So Andy, what do you think? I know, so just for those of you that are one in Canada, so Iris also has been used. I know our partners at Southern Alberta Institute of Technology have tested this. There's a couple of other people that have used it as well. So there is certainly some degree of familiarity up here in Canada as well with Transport Canada. So keep that in mind as well. So Andy, what are your thoughts on the detect and avoid as part of this and integration into some broader systems?
Yeah, so we're actually going to be doing trials just on that, because as Brandon sort of alluded to, like a system like the Iris, an optical system, we did some trials here back in September, and it was good not only at spotting aircraft, but also at spotting other drones. It's obviously limited because you're looking at a really, really tiny target compared to an aircraft, but it was effective as that. And then it comes back to the question of, if it's ground based, then you potentially have obstacles. Buildings are going to get in the way. If you put it on a drone system, then you're going to impact the payload capacity, whether it's a fixed wing or a rotary wing. So those are some of the things to consider. And as Brandon also mentioned, you have to understand the pros and cons. Like an optical system, you're going to do a target identification. A radar system is probably going to be a blip on a map, and then it's up to the operator to interpret that. And this comes back to agencies that want to get into this having to understand all the little nuances of that. If somebody's going to have to interpret a radar signal, like who's that person going to be and how are they going to be trained? There's lots of advantages to technology, because technology works 24/7 and it doesn't need lunch breaks and it doesn't have to take vacation. And like Brandon mentioned too, to be on a hot rooftop or a cold snowy rooftop, it's much better to be a piece of technology than it is a human up there shivering. So there's a cost to technology, but there's also a lot of advantages. But that's what the human is the default in pretty much every country in the world. But I can see that very quickly being replaced by technology.
It's a great point, and I think one of the interesting parts of some of those demos, Andy, was the integration of the drone, the drone detection and drone defense part of that as well into one big broad airspace awareness system, right? And that I think that's a kind of a direction we're going to go, depending on what kind of mitigation capabilities that standard law enforcement is going to have. But certainly there's a benefit of knowing where everything is, not just your own, but especially your own too, for that matter. So Brandon, how do you see the program down there evolving? Like, what are the next steps? What are some of the challenges to growing and scaling these? Like, what do you think for the next phase?
So the next phase, we're working on building out all of the phases. So right now we have phase 1 and phase 2 done. We have phase 3 coming, which is the center point of my city. So, for example, the VET, over 11% of our call for service volume as a whole is located at that shopping center. So that was phase 1 to get the bulk of our calls for service for the whole year. And then the next is the far east side. We have a dock there. And then the center of the city will be the next phase that we end up installing. And also radar, right? So I started this again in 2020. The technology that I went with back then is starting to evolve. It's getting a lot better. There's newer products that are out there. There's more affordable products that are out there. There's new aircraft that are out there. So it's adjusting the program with times. And so the next phase will be building out the center. It will be updating all of our equipment, and then integrating that in with Paralance Real-Time Crime Center. So that way we can bring in all of the different aspects of law enforcement for situation awareness into one nice location. So currently Officer Ubry he's one of our more prolific pilots. Him and Sergeant Felix Williams kind of run the DFR program at this point. and are working on getting the integration with the real-time crime center. So they'll have all of our traffic cams, all of our access to all of our ALPRs, drone in a box solutions as well. So that's where it's all headed, is that greater integration for real-time crime centers. But like I said, right now we're running with Doc 1s. We'll be looking at Doc 2s as well. So again, updating equipment and things of that nature are going to be next steps.
Okay, DJI products are great. And you guys haven't had any pressure on the DJI products down there. Everybody's still happy with that.
I personally have been the subject of 3 or 4 FOIA requests, Public Information Act requests, about my involvement with DJI, because I'm on 2 commercials for them now, for the 300 and the M3E. But yeah, I mean, that is an ongoing discussion. This last legislative session, we had 4 bills that came forward about country of origin bans. And luckily in the state of Texas, we are very integrated in with our legislators. And so we were able to combat those bills and defeat all 4 of those bills last legislative session. We're moving forward in target hardening legislation for making sure that just dies in committees, so that they understand our stance. But again, by utilizing third-party software like DroneSense, it allows us to be able to navigate those waters, right? Instead of utilizing the native app, we use a third-party application that doesn't touch the servers, right? So it allows it to be a much more secure platform. Not to mention it's an outstanding piloting system with a lot of integrations.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I think for those of you that were here with Chief Baker and John yesterday, that was certainly one of the things we talked about. Chief Baker brought up this idea of an extra layer of security on your operations, and so I think it's important. So we, at the end of the day, we're customer focused, and we have, with all due respect to everybody, we have the best solutions, and then we have the best, non-Chinese solutions. So we've got you covered in each direction, and we strive to bring you the best possible solution. The good news, though, is the software part of the platforms, aside from the hardware, is mostly North American or European. So there's a lot of significance there. So so my advice to certainly the Canadians joining us is, I wouldn't be overly worried about having to make a switch or anything, but just feel comfortable that if you do, then you'll be covered. So Andy, so just kind of throwing it over to you. You said to me one time not to create an international incident, but you said to me one time that the U.S. is ahead of us in DFR, but we will soon surpass them in DFR. So what did you mean by that? What did you mean by that incredible Homer statement there?
Yeah. Thanks for getting me into trouble internationally. Thanks, Kevin. No, I certainly didn't mean anything bad by it, because in a lot of ways, the U.S. has been a huge help to our public safety up here, and especially people like Brandon and Chula Vista. So what I meant is there's a lot of really good stuff that goes on in Canada that really doesn't make the news. And I think the way our legislation right now is progressing, especially the next round of updates, I think for at least a year, once that comes into effect, we're probably going to be ahead of the U.S. before their next round comes in. So I think sometimes just because we're a smaller country, and I think in some ways I might get in trouble here. I think our Transport Canada is sometimes easier to work with than the FAA. Just a lot of bureaucracy in every government agency, but maybe a little bit less. So I think that is going to maybe give us a little bit more flexibility, especially, like I said, with the new regulations coming in, to certainly not in numbers and quantity, but in the ability of certain agencies to do things just much more complicated than they are now. And I think that'll happen very quickly.
Makes sense. All right, good. So maybe let's talk a little bit more specifics for someone who's just looking to set up a program, right? So from the gear side of it, we talked about, here's how we want to implement baby steps and little pilots and do a little bit, get some quick wins. But what about from like a hardware, software, or equipment perspective? Maybe walk people through some of the considerations, Brandon, that you should be looking at when you're trying to decide how and what you're going to deploy for your testing, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's an outstanding question. So it's the most common question I get. is how to start up one of these programs. And the first thing that I recommend is figure out how you're going to deploy these systems, right? What is your policy on what are you going to fly for? What are you not going to fly for? And how are you going to safeguard your community's privacy? Because those are going to be the biggest challenges you're going to have to navigate. Once you're able to figure out what you're going to fly for, then you can figure out what type of systems will meet the mission requirements, right? So there's a lot of hardware that's out there. There's a lot of really good software that's out there, and get with ARM-US on that and figure out from a hardware perspective what's going to best suit your needs. They have a ton of options that you can choose from there. From there, you're going to need to go into a site analysis, find out where is going to be a good location to have a launch site. Is it RF saturated? Does it have good satellite connectivity? Does it have good cellular connectivity, right? Data connectivity. Is the launch site that you have powered? Can you run an Ethernet cable up there? All of these things are things you need to take into account, because you don't want to say, yeah, that's where I want to have it, and then you climb up a 180-foot water tower like I had to 4 times to run power and internet up there, right? So things to learn. So that's a lot of the big factors on that. The next is, what type of software are you going to utilize to pilot your system? Can it integrate in with multiple different aircraft in case you need to pivot and adjust with the times on aircraft changes? Can it integrate in with your computer-aided dispatch? Can it integrate in with your detect and avoid solutions, things of that nature? And that's one of the benefits of DroneSense, is we have those integrations and for multiple different aircrafts. Once you have done that, and then it's get with the ACLU, and for us, that's what we did, and we found out, what do y'all want to see from a privacy perspective on how should we fly these systems, right? So one of the things that we have, just like Chula Vista, I'm positive they talked about it, because and if they didn't, they really did themselves a disservice. But they have a publicly facing dashboard that is just amazing. If you've never seen it, go to it. Just look up Chula Vista drone program, and you'll see they have a very transparent page, and that's what saves the program. It allows everybody to see, okay, look, they're not snooping, they're not spying on me, which is the biggest concern that a lot of people have about drone as first responder programs. So make sure you have that ability, and make sure that you're fully transparent in what you're doing. Talk about it a lot. Go to community events, and really showcase your program for that, so that everybody knows where you're at and where you're going, and get some feedback from the community as well to know where you need to head.
Excellent. So Andy, what are your thoughts for Canada specific stuff in that area?
I think Brandon nailed it. I think the only things I would add is just I think a lot of agencies get into it, especially in the administrators, without really understanding what's involved. You have to pick the right system. A lot of the systems like Chula Vista uses, if you have a 30 or 40-minute flight time, you're not going to be out there for extended periods of time. You're going to be more reactive. You're going to hear a call. They actually have a unique system. Well, I think other agencies do too, live 911. So their operators are not just waiting to get dispatched, they're monitoring 911. If they hear a call that sounds like it'll be sort of suitable to launch a drone for, they'll respond to that. So the whole process happens really quickly. I don't know if we're going to jump into the fixed wing now, but most of the agencies are looking at rotary wings, like an M300, M350, and they're familiar with those. But you have a flight time, depending on how you're operating it, at like 30, 35 minutes, maybe a little bit more. But now we're talking about vertical takeoff and landing fixed wings, where now you have an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours of flight time, but it's a whole different dynamic. You can't just take a rotary pilot and put them on a fixed wing. It's a different way of thinking. It's a different way of reacting. Agencies that maybe are used to their drone pilots flying every few weeks or even few months, you just can't do that anymore. You need people that are dedicated, committed to the program, have a high situational awareness. And then same thing, it comes back to, it's not just the system, it's all the supporting software and programs that make it happen, and the operator selection. There's a lot of moving pieces to having a successful program. The other thing I'd like to add too is it's one of the really few areas of technology where you really can blend between primarily police, fire, and EMS. It really is a multi-agency platform. Obviously, we have a lot of fire departments within our group, and everybody speaks the same language. They might have a different application, but for the most part, they're using the same systems. They have the same challenges. They have the same operating considerations. And a picture's worth 1,000 words. A picture that a police drone takes is beneficial to a fire department. It could be beneficial to an EMS agency if there's an air ambulance landing. Like, everybody takes whatever they need from a picture that doesn't always get translated in like information from a witness, because we know how unreliable they are. Just the last one I'd mention is, I know Chula Vista just published one of their calls they responded to, I think just November, early December, and it was basically a car fire, and they responded to it and were able to give real-time image to not only their commanders on the ground, but also the fire department. So that kind of stuff is, departments have to be prepared. This technology is going to change the way they think, change the way they operate, for the better, but it's definitely something to consider.
So you mentioned the fixed wing part of that as well, and I know next week there's a conference, the OMRA conference, where we'll be running some demos. That's up in the Waterloo area for those of you that are local to Ontario. And one of the things you're going to sort of look at scenario wise is integration of these longer flight fixed wing platforms as part of a DFR program. So maybe talk about how that kind of augments the program in a bit more detail.
Yeah, certainly in our test, we've operated a number of fixed wing, and I know speaking to some of our partners in the US, when you're looking at fixed wing, you're looking at basically longer time on target. It really changes the game. So instead of cycling rotary aircraft every 20, 30 minutes or so, now you have a system that is up overhead for multiple hours. But it's a different way of thinking. Like, you can't just stop and drop down and look at a target. You have to kind of think differently. So some of the things we're going to be doing, and some of our agencies do here, is running on one call multiple systems. So you might have a fixed wing overhead for an hour or 2 hours, and then you have a smaller M300, M350 or smaller drones that are able to get down lower, get in close to a target, or provide a payload that the fixed wing just can't. But it comes back to managing, right? Like, you need the operators that are capable of doing that. You have to manage the airspace, because a fixed wing, you're not just going to land immediately. You have to be much more situational, have much more situational awareness. So you need those programs that can bring in all that information and use it effectively. If you can, like I said, you can have all the information in the world, but if you have too much information and it's overwhelmed, or it doesn't go to the right people at the right time, then it's kind of pointless. So the right systems, the right information management system, the right operators, there's a lot of things in play, and those are some of the things we're going to go over next week.
Fantastic. So Brandon, I'm not sure if you had done any fixed wing operations, and it sounded like most of your stuff is kind of urban. Just kind of as a thought experiment. Obviously, Canada, we got a lot of big open spaces, as I guess the sort of Texas. So for some of these rural applications where maybe we have to worry less about flying over people, and we have longer distances, how do you see this technology transferring over to areas where there's just a bunch of big empty space?
Yeah, VTOL's the way to go. I can't stress that enough. And we would love to run, like, drones. Pearland would love to run a VTOL solution as well, because in my city we have no topography. We have a 15-foot elevation change across my entire city, and so a VTOL solution potentially could cover multiple different launch sites with the ability to fly so far and be able to stay in the air for an extended period of time, right? So there's a lot of really good use cases there. I think that maybe small scale VTOL would be a great solution in the future. We just don't quite have the integrations. Like, for example, one of the ones that I really love the footprint for is a FlightWave. The payload's a little bit lacking from a DFR perspective, but it's a great footprint. So if it had a dock and a little bit better payload, I think it would be truly optimized for DFR. But it's just the VTOL solutions just aren't quite there yet, right? But for really rural areas, really large scale, it's the obvious choice because the quadcopters just isn't efficient. So Yeah, I mean, it's another tool for the same type of job, and I think that there will be some bigger integrations here coming in the near future for VTOL solutions.
Fantastic. So, Andy, do you look at, I mean, I look at some of the Canadian issues we have with some of these rural communities in Eastern Canada and obviously up north, that there's just a response delay for RCMP or whoever has to respond, right? Could you see a scenario where you just, in many of these small communities, you just have a remotely operated, drone in the box system, and it's controlled from a regional pilot, and you get eyes on the scene that way? Could you see that happening?
Absolutely. I think one of the volunteer fire departments we're working with now, like everywhere else, they're struggling to get people to respond. And if you have the people you have, if you're constantly calling them out, that creates an issue. So potentially, if you have a drone system that can get out and determine whether what a situation is, whether you need to send everybody or whether it's not as big a deal as it was when the caller came in. That means you can better manage the people resources, which a lot of agencies are struggling with to get the number of people, and the people they do have. If you overwork them, then that's a challenge too. So potentially, like a volunteer fire department, it sounds expensive, but it really is a much cheaper solution to launch from a building and get eyes on maybe a fire or a traffic collision and determine exactly what the situation is. Maybe it's more serious than you thought. Maybe it's not, and you don't have to call out as many people, so you can save those people for the next real incident. So that's where I can see this technology really becoming an advantage in those situations.
Definitely very exciting. Brandon, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, like I said, just to add to what Andy mentioned there, I mean, I think that's where the future is going, right? I think that um, these longer response times that we're currently seeing, because people are having a hard time getting to the call for service because of other calls for service, right? Like I think that is going to go way down by agencies utilizing DFR. These escalated scenes from law enforcement are going to go away because there's going to be, or going to be reduced, I should say, because there's going to be a lot of calls that the drone will clear the call for you. So we never have to have put a police officer there. That de-escalates the scene immediately just by not having somebody there. It'll also allows us to make up better tactics. So if we can see somebody is armed or not armed, we can change the way that goes. Right. Again, there's another video that Chula Vista has where they got called out for the guy with the gun, and when they watched the guy with the DFR drone before officers got there, they found it's a lighter. It's not a gun. Right. Like if that kid decided to do something stupid with a lighter, he would have got killed. But because of the DFR drone, they were able to say, this is not a gun. We validated this is not a gun. He is not armed. This is a lighter. Handle it like a lighter, right? That changes the tactics. That changes the response time, um, operations. And so I think that that's going to be hugely beneficial. I think you're going to be really hard pressed if nothing really changes. I think you're going to be really hard pressed to not find a public safety agency utilizing DFR within the next 5 to 10 years. So.
Well, that's a bold statement. One I agree with this. So, okay, so we're just going to kind of wrap things up here. So, any questions that you have for the guys while we're here, just quickly fire them in the Q&A in the chat, and we will get it answered. While you are typing away your questions, I will just confirm a couple of things. So, as mentioned, the OMR conference, which is sold out, I believe, next week, but I believe Wednesday the 10th, Andy, you might have some space for some departments if they want to come to Waterloo and see some of the equipment, and you can reach out to Andy at Sarah directly or myself at RMUS. If you're in the West Coast, Calgary, we have our third annual Western Road Show. So it'll be Calgary on Wednesday, May 1st, and Edmonton Thursday, May 2nd. We will have a bunch of docks there, fixed wing, all kinds of good equipment, lots of new stuff this year, so it should be really exciting. So that will be there. And then for those of you across Canada and the US, we will be hosting the first annual remotely operated and autonomous robotics, also known as ROAR conference. That will be in conjunction with Ontario Tech University, so out in Oshawa, just east of Toronto. That will be Wednesday and Thursday, June 19 and 20th. And so that's going to be a great event sponsored by Boston Dynamics, DJI, AVSS, Parrot. We will have, so far we've got about 12 OEMs that will be coming out to that. There is a Sarah has been kind enough to sponsor the Sarah Public Safety Stream. So we will have 2 days of seminars for DFR and non-DFR operations for public safety. So that is going to be great. You'll have a chance to see all the docks and all the equipment will be set up in Ontario Tech there, so you get hands-on. There'll be a playroom to fire stuff around. So put that on your calendar. We will officially be sending out invites and everything on the 10th of April. But for those of you that are on here, just mark the 19th and 20th off on your calendar. So I don't see any questions popping up. I will give you another 30 seconds or so. And then, yeah, Andy, did you want to add anything from a Sarah perspective, how people can work with Sarah or any other events you've got coming up?
Yeah, no. So just for clarification, OMRA, we're partnering with OMA. So the conference next week is actually just for accuracy a Sarah conference on DFR. But we're also running some training coming up in the next year. So check out our website. We're available to any current or former public safety, police, fire, EMS. That's our only requirement. But other than that, it's free to join.
Fantastic. And Brandon, you're going to be up here next week for said conference. And do you have any other Canadian trips planned later in the year?
Not yet, but looking forward to any opportunities I can get to travel abroad. So would be happy to come back.
Fantastic. So anybody interested in learning more or seeing some of the drone sense stuff, then we'll keep you posted on opportunities there. All right. So it looks like there are no questions. So I am going to wrap us up. And I want to say on behalf of RMUS Canada, my team here, and Andy and Brandon, thank you so much for joining us. And Andy, Brandon, thank you guys so much for making time in your busy day to see the people. So everybody join us this afternoon at 2 for full hands-on remote demos. We're actually going to be flying stuff in Colombia, in Canada, and in Florida. So it's an international bevy of drone in a box systems. Probably never been attempted before ever. And hopefully it'll work this afternoon. All right, everybody. Take care of yourselves.
Thank you.